She was pregnant, dreaming of becoming a mother, when her own mother-in-law pushed her down the stairs. The fall changed everything. What happened next shocked the entire family, and the truth will leave you speechless. The scream that ripped from Camille Foster shattered the quiet of the Mercer house, a restored colonial mansion off Savannah's oak-tunneled streets. Her body tumbled helplessly down the Carrara marble stairs, each strike a hammer blow against the future she'd cradled with both hands. Red spread through the ivory dress she'd chosen that morning with a hopeful, trembling smile. "Dear God, what happened?" cried Rosa Alvarez, the housekeeper, sprinting toward the unmoving 23-year-old. On the second-floor landing, Eleanor Mercer, 62, Mercer matriarch and local philanthropist, watched with a chill that made the air feel 6 degrees colder. Her gray eyes held not a drop of remorse. She adjusted her strand of real pearls and descended as if nothing at all had happened. "A terrible accident," Eleanor murmured, voice even, calculating. "The poor girl slipped. These marble floors are treacherous when damp." It was a lie. 5 minutes earlier, as Camille climbed the stairs, gently palming her 4-month bump, Eleanor had followed like a snake tasting the air. Venom laced her perfectly carmined lips. "You thought this baby would anchor you to this family, didn't you? Foolish girl." Camille turned confused, honey-brown eyes wet with restrained tears. "Mrs. Mercer, I just want us to be a happy family." "Family?" Eleanor spat. "You're a gold digger who tricked my son. That ends today." Her diamond-ringed hands flashed, one brutal shove to Camille's chest. Calculated. Precise. Deadly. By the time paramedics thundered through the black and white foyer, Eleanor was performing concern, false tears carving careful paths down perfect makeup. "My poor daughter-in-law, my son's child," she sobbed, theatrical to the last. Richard Mercer Jr., 31, burst in from his downtown office, Armani wrinkled with panic. Seeing his wife unconscious on the gurney, his knees vibrated. "Mom, what happened? What happened to Camille?" "It was awful, darling," Eleanor whispered, drawing him close. "She took the stairs and slipped. I was in the garden when I heard the scream." Another polished lie. In the speeding ambulance to St. Augustine Memorial, Camille blinked in and out. Instinct dragged her hand to her belly. Pain blazed white-hot. Images smeared and reformed. Eleanor's shove, that thin smile, those glacier-gray eyes. Hours later, Dr. Samuel Rhodes pushed through the hors d'oeuvres, expression telling the story before his mouth could. Richard collapsed into a waiting room chair as the words dissolved like smoke. "We did everything we could, the baby didn't survive." Eleanor, silent until then, loosed a single tear, real this time, not from grief, but from relief. 3 weeks passed beneath a shroud. The Mercer house, 8,000 square feet of curated southern grandeur, kept its French silk drapes drawn. Silence lay like lead in the corridors, where faint, stubborn stains still clung if you knew where to look, and Rosa hadn't quite managed to scour them away. Camille had awakened from her coma 3 days earlier, and something in her had changed forever. She was no longer the tender, compliant girl who'd arrived 2 years ago dreaming of a perfect American family. The honey in her eyes had gone winter cold. When she looked at Eleanor, something feral glinted back. "Good morning, mother-in-law," Camille said that Thursday, descending the same stairs that had taken her child. Every step measured, every movement a silent declaration of war. Eleanor, breakfasting in the main dining room amid baccarat crystal and antique porcelain, lifted her gaze from Colombian coffee. For the first time in decades, a chill traced her spine. "Camille, dear, how are you feeling? Dr. Rhodes said you should be resting." "Resting?" Camille's smile never reached her eyes. "What for? There's no baby left to protect." "Is there?" The silence that followed could have been cut with a bone knife. Eleanor's hands trembled barely around the delicate china cup. "I know you're suffering," Eleanor said, gentle as arsenic. "It was a terrible accident. No one wanted this." Camille crossed the marble, each heel strike a gavel. "Curious, because I remember exactly what happened on these stairs." Color sluiced from Eleanor's face. I don't know what you mean. You suffered a head injury. The doctors warned us about hallucinations. Hallucinations? Camille sat across from her, close enough to see the fine creases makeup couldn't hide. Was it a hallucination when you called me a gold digger? Was it a hallucination when those diamond-stacked hands hit my chest? The Lewis-style chair clattered as Eleanor lurched to her feet. You're hysterical. Richard should have you admitted before you say anything else unhinged. Hysteria? Camille rose too, and for the first time in 2 years Eleanor saw it, strength. The only madness here is believing you can get away with everything forever. Richard strode in, immaculate suit, sleepless eyes. What is going on? They can hear you in the foyer. Eleanor flew to him, a frightened girl behind a matriarch's mask. Your wife is saying monstrous things. She claims I pushed her, that I killed your child. She needs help. He looked at Camille, pain colliding with doubt. For 2 years he'd watched his mother belittle his wife for her modest upbringing, the secretary who'd married the heir. But murder? Camille, I know you're hurting. I lost our baby too, but my mother would never. Ask her where she was when I fell. Camille cut in, voice like ice. Ask why the wet stairs were bone dry. Ask why there are finger-shaped bruises across my chest. The floor under Eleanor's feet seemed to tilt. She'd scrubbed the narrative 100 times, practiced the lines in a mirror. Those marks are from the fall, doctors said so. About those doctors, Camille said, a small, lethal smile curling. Yesterday I spoke with Nurse Patricia Sandoval. She told me my injuries didn't match a forward tumble. They matched a backward shove. And she told me something else, something you won't be able to explain away. You were at the hospital 3 hours before the ambulance arrived. Buying silence. Richard's face fractured. For the first time in 31 years, he saw hairline cracks in the marble statue he'd worshipped. Mom, is that true? Eleanor opened her mouth. No words came, only a low animal sound. Camille cupped Richard's face, made him meet her eyes. Your mother killed our child. If you keep protecting her, I swear on our baby's memory, this won't end the way you think. At the doorway, Rosa Alvarez appeared, hands shaking around a carved wooden box she'd found in the attic. Miss Camille, she whispered, you need to see this. Inside, photographs, letters, medical files, names. Women who'd lived in this house. Women who'd had accidents. Women who'd vanished. The lid of the Mercer legacy creaked open, and the truth began to breathe. Rosa set the carved lid on the table. Cedar and dust drifted up like a ghost. Inside lay a meticulous archive, rubber-banded envelopes, Polaroids and fading ink, notarized forms, clipped obituaries, even hospital bracelets pressed flat between wax paper. It wasn't a keepsake box. It was a trophy case. Camille's fingers shook as she lifted the first photograph. A young woman with bright, fearless eyes and a floral sundress, smiling on the Mercer house steps. The back was labeled in neat block letters, Adrian Morales, 1985, engagement party. Paperclipped to it was a typed coroner's report, blunt force trauma following a fall from interior staircase. Manner of death, accidental. The signature belonged to a county medical examiner Camille didn't recognize, but 2 carbon copies of cashier's checks, made out the same week to a consulting fund, controlled by Eleanor Mercer, stapled to the file told a different story. There are more, Rosa whispered, pulling another sleeve free. Isabel Ramirez, 1998, cause of death, accidental fall. A wedding photo appeared beneath it, Isabel in lace, her arm looped through a much younger Richard Jr., both beaming under a live oak canopy. Beside it, a hospital discharge summary and a prenatal lab panel. 4 weeks pregnant. Richard staggered back as if the air had been struck from him. No, Mom said. She told me Isabel died in a car crash on I-95. Your mother told you many things, Camille said, voice low, steady. She set down a smaller, sun-bleached snapshot, a gap-toothed 8-year-old on a swing, storm-gray eyes and Richard's crooked grin. On the back, in a child's hand, my brother Richard and me. The name scrawled under it, Gabrielle. Color fled Eleanor's face. "Put that away," she hissed, the mask slipping. "That is private family business." "Private?" Camille's laugh held no warmth. "Like the payoffs? The altered wills?" She pulled a manila folder from the bottom. Notarized amendments, beneficiary changes, life insurance assignments, shifting assets into trusts Eleanor controlled. Dates lined up with the accidents, like lighthouse beacons along a dark coast. Rosa's voice trembled. "I've cleaned this house for 25 years. I remember that night in '98. Miss Isabel ran up those stairs so happy, she just found out she was expecting. Mr. Richard Sr. was still at the office. Mrs. Eleanor followed, and then there was screaming. You will stop talking," Eleanor snapped, the old authority cracking into a snarl. "You are an employee. You have no idea what you think you know." Richard pressed his palms to the table, eyes ping-ponging between his wife, the photos, his mother. "Mom, were you at the hospital before the ambulance? Did you pay anyone?" The question tasted like ash. Eleanor's chin lifted, pearls glinting. "Everything I have ever done has been to protect this family." "From what?" Camille asked. "From women who refuse to be controlled?" No one moved. Somewhere in the house, the grandfather clock tolled 10, slow and accusing. Camille slid her phone from her pocket, and, without breaking eye contact with Eleanor, thumbed through to a number she'd saved after her talk with Nurse Sandoval. "Detective Naomi Whitaker, Major Crimes," the voicemail greeting had said. Now Whitaker answered on the second ring. "This is Camille Foster," Camille said. "I'm at the Mercer House on Whitaker Street. I have photographic evidence, financial records, and medical files suggesting multiple homicides staged as accidents over the last 4 decades. The matriarch, Eleanor Mercer, was involved. We need law enforcement here now." Richard flinched like she'd slapped him. Eleanor's eyes thinned to blades. "You ungrateful." "Save it," Camille said. "You shoved me down those stairs. You killed my child. I'm done pretending." Sirens grew from a far hum to a layered wail, bouncing off brick and wrought iron outside. Blue strobes washed the silk-papered walls. Rosa sank into a chair and crossed herself. Eleanor stood very still, calculating, measuring. Richard's phone buzzed with texts he didn't read. Detective Whitaker arrived with 2 uniforms and a crime scene tech in tow, mid-40s, close-cropped hair, suit that said she'd been up since dawn and wouldn't be sleeping soon. She introduced herself with a clipped nod, clocked the open box in a single sweep, and snapped on gloves. "Ms. Foster," she said, tone even. "Start from the top and do not leave anything out." Camille did. The shove. The dry stares. The bruises that bloomed like fingerprints. Nurse Sandoval's statement. The hospital timeline. The names. The papers. As she spoke, the tech photographed every page and bagged every artifact, calling out evidence markers. E1 through E27, as if labeling a century-old shipwreck. Whitaker pivoted to Eleanor. "Mrs. Mercer, you can answer questions or you can wait for counsel. Your call." Eleanor smiled as if posing for a gala photo. "Detective, this is a grotesque misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law is grieving and confused. Marble is unforgiving. So is grief." Whitaker didn't blink. "You'll make that statement on camera. For now, we're securing this room." Richard hovered at the fringe, undone tie, eyes hollow. "Detective," he said, voice ragged, "my mother would never." Whitaker cut him a look that could slice glass. "Mr. Mercer, I'm familiar with your family's philanthropic footprint. I'm also familiar with your staircase. People don't fall backward without a push. Sit down." Rosa, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl, stared at the tabletop. "Detective," she said softly, "there is more. I should have come sooner, but—" she swallowed. "Fear is a stubborn thing." Whitaker angled toward her. "Take your time." "I was here in 1998, Rosa whispered. "I heard raised voices. I saw Miss Isabel running. I saw Mrs. Eleanor follow. And in 2001, the little girl. Gabrielle. Rose's voice broke on the name. They said she tripped playing? But I found a ribbon on the landing, caught on the banister, yanked hard. I kept it. I don't know why. I kept things. Tucked them away. For God to judge if people wouldn't. Whitaker's gaze flicked to the box, then back. Do you still have the ribbon? Rosa nodded. In my locker off the kitchen. Officer Crane, Whitaker said. Retrieve it. Bag and tag. The uniform peeled off down the hall. Eleanor's composure thinned to a brittle sheen. Detective, this has gone far enough. You have no warrant. I have exigent circumstances and a witness who just placed you at 2 scenes, Whitaker said. And you have a house full of evidence that could walk if I let it. Richard scrubbed his face. Camille, he said, voice cracking. Please. We can talk about this without. Without what? Camille asked. Without the truth? The truth has been bleeding on these floors for 40 years. From the foyer came more voices. Crime scene unit reinforcements, a deputy DA, neighbors rubbernecking behind a lattice of live oaks and Spanish moss. The Mercer name had always drawn a crowd. It would draw a different crowd now. Officer Crane returned with a small plastic bin, a child's ribbon the color of lemonade, threads snarled, fibers frayed where they'd torn. Whitaker's tech photographed it, then sealed it away like something sacred. Mrs. Mercer, Whitaker said, I'm advising you not to touch anything and not to leave this room. Eleanor's jaw set. Do you know who I am? I do, Whitaker said. And I know what I'm looking at. Camille reached again into the cedar box and found a red leather diary, the edges scalloped from years of turning. Inside, a looping hand, October 15th, 1998. Eleanor has been circling me like a hawk. She says I don't understand the true Mercer values. I won't be intimidated. My child will know the truth of this family. Camille slid the diary to Whitaker, then lifted one last folder, yellow, heavy with notarized copies, updated wills signed days before deaths, beneficiary lines rewritten in Eleanor's favor, insurance riders doubled weeks in advance. The dates clicked together like a lock. Whitaker exhaled, long and slow. Call the coroner, she told her team. We're going to court for exhumation orders on anyone whose death certificate says fall downstairs within these walls. Every last one. Eleanor finally looked rattled. You cannot dig up my family. We'll see what a judge says, Whitaker returned. The detective turned back to Camille. Ms. Foster, I'm going to need a formal recorded statement, and the names of everyone who can corroborate your account. You'll also need medical documentation of your injuries. Camille nodded. Whatever you need. And you, Whitaker said to Richard, will provide a list of your mother's attorneys, accountants, and any household staff who left abruptly after a family tragedy. If you fail to cooperate, I will assume you're obstructing. Richard stared at the ribbon bag, at the Polaroids, at the diary that had survived him and his selective memory. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glass. I'll make the list. Outside, the sirens wound down. Inside, the house hummed with a different pitch. Tripods, evidence tents, lasers leveling across marble, numbered placards blooming like tiny flags across the battlefield of a family's legend. Camille stood at the window, palm against cool glass, watching a city she loved keep moving while her world reset its axis. In the reflection she saw Eleanor behind her, small and hard and furious. Beyond that, Richard, equal parts broken and unreadable. Between them, the open cedar box, a hole in the floor of the past. Detective Whitaker holstered her pen. This place is now a crime scene, she said. And we're just getting started. By dusk, the Mercer house had become a hive of tripods and evidence tents. Blue tape cordoned off the lawn where lanterns swung under live oaks and Spanish moss. Detective Naomi Whitaker moved like a metronome through the rooms, her team mapping the stairwell with lasers while a clerk from Chatham County Superior Court hustled in with fresh orders. Judge Barnett signed the exhumations, Whitaker said, sliding copies to her CSI lead. Anyone tied to a staircase fall on this property in the last 40 years. Open them all. They started behind the rose garden Eleanor loved to feature on home tours. A GBI van rolled up. Dr. Fernando Salinas, the state's forensic pathologist, stepped out in a paper suit and calm eyes that had seen too much. "Grit it," he told his techs. Flags sprouted in neat rows. The first trench gave them bones: adult female pelvis, broken right humerus, skull with radiating fractures that matched a fall from height. A second trench yielded another skeleton, multiple healed fractures layered over fresh breaks. A third trench, smaller, precise, lined with old marbles and a rusted tin pony, stopped everyone cold. Whitaker swallowed. "Careful there." Dr. Salinas knelt. The tiny ulna, the faint curve of ribs, a child. A faded ribbon lay near the skull, the same lemonade yellow as the one Rosa had saved, threads torn as if wrenched. He closed his eyes a beat, then nodded to his tech. "Photograph. Bag. Document everything." Word traveled as fast as sirens. By the time stars pricked the Georgia sky, a black sedan slipped to the curb and a man in a linen jacket stepped out, face lined and proud. He introduced himself in the foyer with a voice that had rehearsed this moment for decades. "My name is Joaquin Morales," he said, eyes on Eleanor. "I'm Adrienne's brother, the woman your husband was going to marry in 1985 before she died on those stairs." Richard went sheet white. Camille gripped the banister. Joaquin carried a document case, battered heavy. "I have letters Adri wrote me, detective. 2 days before she died, she wrote that Eleanor threatened her, told her she'd never be a Mercer." He set down a photograph, long lens, grainy, a young Eleanor in black at a graveside, mouth pulled in the slightest, strangest curl. Eleanor's mask fissured. "This is grotesque. You people keep parading grief like theater." Whitaker didn't bite. "Sir, we'll need to retain those." She turned to Dr. Salinas, who stepped in from the garden, suit muddied, clipboard full. "Preliminary," he said. 3 adult females, 1 child. The fracture patterns on the adults are consistent with forceful propulsion from height. Posterior injuries first, not anterior. The child's arm shows perimortem torsion. Someone grabbed her, hard. He didn't have to add the rest. Rosa stood with her hands sandwiched tight, knuckles white. "Gabrielle," she whispered. She was 8. She called him Ricky. She made him bracelets from those little plastic beads. Her voice thinned to a thread. She trusted him. Richard stared at the floor so long Camille thought he'd fuse to it. When he finally looked up, his eyes had the glassiness of a man trying to choose a version of himself to live with. Whitaker faced Eleanor. "Mrs. Mercer, I am placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder, fraud, and conspiracy." She recited the rights cleanly, clipped. A uniform stepped forward with cuffs. Eleanor didn't flinch. If anything, she straightened, queen to the scaffold. "You mistake resolve for crime," she said. "I kept this family intact when weaker people would have let it rot." "Intact?" Camille said, the words shredding in her mouth. "You buried women behind your roses." Whitaker signaled, and the cuffs clicked. Eleanor's pearls caught the foyer light like frost. Richard flinched at the sound the way some men flinch at thunder. As they led Eleanor past the staircase, Rosa reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small key on a saint's keychain. "Detective," she said, voice shaking. "There's a locker off the catering corridor. My things. I kept more than a ribbon." Whitaker took the key. "Officer Crane, secure it." In the sudden quiet, Camille felt the house breathe for the first time. Not relief, something rawer, like a wound seeing air. She drifted to the dining table where the cedar box still sat, then paused. A slip of paper had worked loose from the underside of the lid, pinned by an old square of tape. She peeled it free. A birth certificate. Richard Whitlow Mercer, born March 15, 1994, mother, Eleanor Whitlow, father, Richard Whitlow Mercer Sr. issued from a small clinic 2 counties over. The line where Caroline Mercer's name should have been, blank. Camille's heart lurched. She turned the page to find a notarized adoption acknowledgement, signed weeks later by Caroline, Richard Sr.'s wife, The woman Richard had called Mom his whole life. A second page showed life insurance increases in Caroline's name 3 weeks before her heart attack. Whitaker's eyes sharpened as Camille handed the papers over. "We'll verify through the clinic," she said. "But if this holds, it places Eleanor as your biological mother, Mr. Mercer." Richard swayed as if someone had pulled every nail out of the floorboards. "No," he said, too soft. "No, my mother loved me. She couldn't have." His voice broke. "Love doesn't inoculate against poison," Dr. Salinas said quietly from the doorway, then winced at his own bluntness. "I'm sorry." From the kitchen corridor, Officer Crane reappeared with a plastic bin. Inside were mini cassette tapes, labeled in Rose's careful hand, October 12, 1998, Library, Voices Raised. December 3, 2001, Playroom, Gabrielle and Ricky. April 6, 1988, Caroline T., Eleanor and Ricky's senior whispering. Rows and rows of them. Rose's 25 years of fear, alphabetized. Whitaker's poker face cracked into something like awe. "Ms. Alvarez, this is a trove." She glanced at the clock. "We'll need to digitize, authenticate, cross-reference with phone logs and payroll. Call ADA Raul Mendizabal. I want him in my ear before midnight." Eleanor paused at the threshold, turning her head just enough to aim a look at Richard that Camille had never seen in public, a mother's claim with a predator's pride. "Stand up straight," she told him, as if he were still 13. "And remember who you are." For a heartbeat, something hard and strange flickered behind Richard's eyes. It was gone before Camille could name it. They walked Eleanor out under the moss and cameras. The neighborhood, drunk on gossip, swelled at the edges of the tape. Somewhere, a news anchor practiced her solemn face. Inside, Whitaker handed Camille a card. "We'll set up a recorded statement in the morning. Tonight I want you somewhere safe." Camille nodded. "Rosa's staying with me." Rosa blinked, surprised, then squeezed Camille's hand. "I'll make coffee. Strong." As they passed the foyer, Joaquin stopped in front of a gilt mirror and touched a photo he'd brought like a reliquary. "Mi hermana," he whispered to the glass, "my sister." Then, to Camille. "Thank you for breaking a door I could not." The teen thinned as midnight inched in. Evidence vans hummed. The staircase, the axis of so much ruin, stood wrapped in numbered tags and laser lines like a monument under siege. Richard lingered on the landing, staring down at the crosshairs painted in red light. Camille found him there, silence hot between them. "She ruined us," he said, voice hollow. "She ruined everything." Camille studied him. The boy who needed protecting, the man who'd chosen not to see, both stood in front of her. "No," she said. "She ruined herself. We decide what happens next." For a moment his mouth shifted, as if forming a word that wasn't apology. Instead he said, flat as slate, "You think she acted alone?" The question knifed the air. Camille's ribs went cold. "What are you saying, Richard?" He didn't answer. Downstairs, a tech called out another evidence number, and a camera flashed like heat lightning. Whitaker stepped back into the foyer with headphones and a portable deck, Rose's first cassette already rolling. Faint through the hiss came young voices in a library, words jagged, breathless. "You don't belong here. I'm pregnant. Then you'll be gone before anyone knows." The tape clicked, then hissed again. Whitaker looked up, eyes colder than marble. "We're past accident," she said. "We're at pattern." In the hush that followed, Richard finally met Camille's gaze. Something new lived there, neither grief nor denial. Something calculative, dangerous. "We all have patterns," he said softly. "You'll learn mine soon enough." By morning, Whitaker had converted a guest salon into a command post, whiteboards webbed with timelines, property maps tacked under red string, a rolling cart stacked with Rose's mini-cassettes. CSU vans idled in the drive. The Mercer house, once a cornerstone on Savannah's preservation tours, was now a living autopsy. They started with the tapes. A tech threaded one into a portable deck. After a hiss and a click, young voices spilled from 1998. A woman breathless, a man trying to velvet his fury. Isabel. I'm pregnant, Richard. I'm telling you first. Richard. You shouldn't have snooped in Dad's files. Isabel. Someone's laundering money through Eleanor's trusts. Richard. Low. Then you won't be here when I get back. The tape cracked with the clatter of footsteps, a gasp, a muffled cry. Silence. Then a door closing very softly. Richard stood in the doorway of his father's study, arms folded, pretending the words were moths bumping glass. Camille watched his face for any human heat and found the gleam of calculation instead. Another cassette, April 6, 1988, pantry mic. Two voices, Eleanor's and an older male, slid through the speakers. Eleanor. If Caroline signs the adoption, we increase her policy. If she asks questions, T fixes anything. Richard Sr. You're ruthless. Eleanor. Pleasant. I'm efficient. Whitaker's look flicked to Camille, then to the copy of Caroline's adoption acknowledgement on the table. This lines up to the week, she said. We'll exhume Caroline Mercer too. From the garden, Dr. Salinas stepped in, surgical mask tugged to his throat. We've recovered 4 sets of remains so far, he reported. 3 adults, 1 child. The child's dental eruption puts her at roughly 8. Items consistent with a little girl were interred: beads, paper crowns, crayons. He held up a clear bag, a sun-faded crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. Over them, a scrawl in purple, my brother Richard and me. Camille's breath snagged. Richard stared at the bag hard enough to crack it, the muscle in his jaw ticking like a metronome. A uniform announced, Assistant District Attorney Raul Mendizabal, and a man in a navy suit stepped in, reins stippling his shoulders. He shook Whitaker's hand, took in the boards, the bags, the box, then exhaled like he tasted the rot himself. Detective, you have probable cause for arrest and a mountain for indictment, he said. But I need one thing airtight, Richard's knowledge. We'll never keep Eleanor in a box if he wiggles. Then you'll want this, came a woman's voice from the doorway. She was mid-40s, sharply dressed, grief carved into elegance. Paloma Vega, she said. Isabel Ramirez's sister. She set a slim recorder on the table. 3 months before Isabel fell, Richard got drunk at the President Hotel bar. I pressed him about Caroline. He said, and I quote, chamomile tea hides anything. I recorded the conversation. I didn't know what to do with it without getting killed. I know now. Whitaker nodded to a tech, who jacked the recorder into a speaker. The room filled with bar noise, ice, jazz, the low burr of the guilty. Paloma on tape. What really happened to Caroline? Richard slurred silk. She found a letter. The adoption. Wanted the truth. I gave her a Kinder one. Paloma. You poisoned her. Richard, a smile you could hear. I said Kinder, not painless. The air thinned. A.D.A. Mendizabal's face went chalk. Detective, he said hoarsely. For the record, the physician who signed Caroline's certificate was Dr. Aurelio Mendizabal, my father. He admitted, before he died, to falsifying death records for powerful families. He swallowed, the confession sawing him from the inside. I'm recusing from charging decisions. Assign a special prosecutor. But keep me here as a witness. I won't run from this. Whitaker's jaw flexed once. Noted, counselor. Richard finally moved, a slow step toward the table, palms open as if to calm a skittish horse. You people are cobbling grief into a narrative, he said, voice tuned for juries and donors. You'll find nothing in those pits except time. That tape? Deep faked. Paloma didn't flinch. I have the hotel receipt. I have metadata. I have a selfie you asked me to take, she said, sliding over a photo. Richard and Paloma in the amber bar light, his eyes glassy, 2 fingers raised in a smug V. Enough, Whitaker said. She turned to Richard. Richard Whitlow Mercer Jr., you are under arrest for the murder of Caroline Mercer, the murder of Isabel Ramirez, the murder of Gabrielle Mercer, conspiracy to commit multiple homicides, and fraud. She stepped in, voice leveling into Miranda. You have the right to remain silent, Richard laughed, too loud, too bright. You think a last name as old as mine breaks on a detective with a folding table? Not on a table, Whitaker said. On evidence. She nodded once. 2 uniforms closed. Rosa, shaking, stood. Detective, there's something else, she said, digging in her apron and producing a plain thumb drive. 5 years ago I started recording what I heard after hours. I was scared. I thought they'd kill me if I went to police. But when Miss Camille lost the baby, I couldn't be scared anymore. Whitaker passed the drive to her tech. Mirror it. 3 copies. 1 to my car. The first file cued, kitchen corridor, 2 voices, whispering. Eleanor. She's pregnant. The secretary. She'll try to rewrite his will. Richard. She's naive. You push, I'll cry. Eleanor. We'll do this like the others. Richard, flat. The stairs. Camille's stomach iced over. The room seemed to pivot on the twin words. Dr. Salinas's phone buzzed. He listened, face settling into a deeper gravity. Detective, he said quietly, covering the mic. They've uncovered a 5th grave. Adult female. Soft tissue preserved enough for tox screening. There's tea residue in a cup we found in the soil. Caroline, Paloma whispered. Oh God. Whitaker looked to Mendizabal. He nodded tight. Book him, he said. The cuffs kissed Richard's wrists with a metallic snap. He didn't struggle. He simply turned his head and found Camille. I would have given you the world, he said. You never understood how the world works. No, Camille said, voice steady. I finally do. They were halfway to the door when Richard lunged, not toward Whitaker, not toward the techs, but toward Rosa. It was a serpent strike, pure reflex, hands reaching for her throat. A uniform hit checked him into the doorframe. Richard's head cracked wood with a dull thud. He slid down, dazed, eyes suddenly wild, the handsome mask peeled away. You ruined it, he hissed at Rosa. You ruined everything. Rosa lifted her chin, tears steadying into steel. I prayed 25 years for someone to ruin your hell. They hauled him upright and frog-marched him past the staircase he and his mother had used as a private gallows. Outside, cameras sparked like summer lightning. Someone shouted his name. Somebody else spit the word monster. Inside, quiet rebuilt itself molecule by molecule. Whitaker pinched the bridge of her nose, then started moving again. Search warrants for the law office and the family foundation, she said to a detective scribbling furiously. Subpoena the hospital board minutes, security footage from St. Augustine Memorial, any consults signed by Dr. Mendizabal Sr. the week of Caroline's death. Cross-reference staff departures with obituaries marked accident. Dr. Salinas, prioritize talks on the 5th set. Rosa, we'll need your formal statement and chain of custody on every recording. Ms. Foster, hospital records, photos of your bruising, and any texts or emails from Eleanor in the last 6 months. Camille nodded, the list steadier than air. She pressed her palm against the newel post at the bottom of the stairs, the same post that had snagged a lemonade ribbon 24 years ago, and exhaled until something in her chest loosened. Joaquin Morales stepped close, voice low. Justice is slow, he said. But it has a very long memory. Make sure the court does, too, Paloma added, sliding Whitaker a manila folder thick with bank transfers, hotel receipts, and dates circled in red. By noon, the Mercer house was emptying, evidence bagged, boards photographed, the staircase laced in laser lines like a trapped animal. Whitaker paused at the threshold, studied the room as if committing it to brain tissue. This place built a myth, she said. We'll build a record. Her phone buzzed. She flicked to speaker. Whitaker. A deputy's voice came tinny from the precinct. Detective, heads up. Eleanor Mercer requested to see her son in processing. The lieutenant denied it, but she started screaming. Says she won't live to see a trial. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Keep them separated. Search her property again. Then search it again. The line clicked dead. Rain began to fret the windows, small needles against old glass. Rosa touched Camille's sleeve. Come, she said gently. Eat something. You need strength for what's next. What's next? Camille asked. The part where they try to make us doubt what we already know, Rosa said. The part where they act one last time. Hours later, under the humming fluorescence of the precinct, Eleanor performed exactly that. She rose in chains, eyes bright with a fever that wasn't medical, and announced in a voice as regal as a benediction. If the Mercers fall, we fall on our terms. From the canvas satchel she'd kept since morning, missed in the first cursory inventory because nothing about her screamed threat, she pulled a steel gray cylinder with a pin. Every cop in the booking room moved at once. Grenade! Someone shouted. Eleanor smiled, a small, devastating crescent. At last, you're paying attention. The booking room froze as Eleanor Mercer lifted the gray cylinder and tugged the pin. Metal chairs scraped. A deputy dove. Another yanked the fire door. Detective Whitaker was already moving, palms out, voice flat as a level. Set it down, Eleanor. On the floor. Now. Eleanor smiled, a slim moon of satisfaction. At last, she said. You understand what it means to be a Mercer. A bomb tech from ED slid in behind Whitaker, visor down, suit hissing. He didn't negotiate. He stepped straight to Eleanor, guided her wrist, and scooped the device into a heavy canvas bucket in a single, practiced motion. 30 seconds stretched like a lifetime. The tech glanced at the knurling, the weight, the stamped cereal. His shoulders loosened. Inert, he called. Training grenade. No filler. The room exhaled in ragged chorus. Eleanor's composure didn't crack. If anything, she looked faintly amused that the curtain had dropped and the audience still sat spellbound. Whitaker nodded once at the tech, then at the deputies. Full strip search. All property. No contact with co-defendants. Put her in a camera cell. On the other side of the wall, in holding B, Richard watched through the wired glass as if it were theater he'd already seen. When Whitaker stepped in, he didn't bother to stand. She never did have the courage for the real thing, he said softly. Only the performance. Whitaker didn't answer. She set an evidence bag on the table, clear plastic crinkling. Rose's thumb drive mirrored 3 ways. Performance won't help you, she said. Recordings will. They booked him and Eleanor without bail. The indictment that followed 2 days later was a skyscraper. 48 counts across 2 defendants: murder, felony murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, obstruction. A special prosecutor from Atlanta, Cynthia Park, took carriage of the case after Ada Mendizabal recused himself and slid to the witness roster with a jaw like granite and eyes that didn't miss corners. The dig at Mercer House went on for a week. Dr. Salinas and his team flagged out a pass beneath the roses, 15 graves in total, all female, 1 child. Caroline Mercer's plot was different, lined with broken teacups and beads that had fused into the soil. A lab rush on bone shavings and hair shafts came back with strychnine and cyanide. The staircase told the rest: impact patterns, torque fractures, the geometry of a shove. Whitaker built a timeline on a 10-foot whiteboard. The red pin started in 1985, Adrian Morales, the fiancé with the floral dress and the defiant smile. Then 1988, Caroline, chamomile tea and a forged certificate. 1998, Isabel, newly pregnant, trying to tell the truth. 2001, Gabrielle, whose stick figure drawing of 2 hand-holding siblings now lived in a zippered evidence pouch. And 5 housekeepers whose names the city had never learned: Socorro, Rosa Maria, Patricia, Ana Lucia, Esperanza. Between them ran money, insurance riders doubled weeks before. Accidents, deeds shunted to trusts, cashier's checks to a medical examiner who'd long since gone to ground in a cemetery of his own. Rosa spent 2 days in an interview room with a tissues box and 3 detectives rotating in and out. Her voice was small at first, then it wasn't. She mapped the house no blueprint could, who whispered at the pantry door, which board creaked by the landing, where Eleanor kept the lockbox key, behind a gilt sconce shaped like an angel's wing. She gave them a pattern, the way Eleanor softened her voice when she was about to strike, the way Richard rehearsed grief in mirrors. Camille did the hospital circuit, St. Augustine Memorial's ER logs, ultrasound techs who remembered covering a composite bruise with a warmed blanket, security footage of Eleanor in a scarf and sunglasses 3 hours before the ambulance arrival, a billing clerk who slid a stack of invoices across a break-room table with the words, "I don't want my name on this, but I can't sleep anymore." Pre-trial, the defense tried to bury the recordings as unlawfully obtained. Park argued them in with chain of custody affidavits that ran like stair treads, Rosa's key to her locker, the thumb drive mirrored in triplicate, timestamps that matched pay stubs and security cams to the minute. The judge, a woman who'd grown up 3 blocks from the Mercer gates and wanted facts, not ghosts, denied the motion. "If a housekeeper lives in fear for 25 years in a house of violence, the law will not punish her for preserving the truth," she said. The gallery hummed like a struck wire. Paloma Vega, who had spent 5 years quietly collecting receipts and hiding a recorder under an atrium fern, turned over more than anyone expected, hotel bar tabs, a selfie that caught Richard's eyes glazed and lazy, a napkin scribbled with a sequence of numbers later traced to an insurance policy change. She also brought a voice that didn't shake. Joaquin Morales delivered his sister's letters in a leather folio worn thin at the spine. 2 days before they killed her, he told Park. She wrote that Eleanor Mercer had told her she would never be a Mercer. On the stand later, he didn't look at Eleanor as he said it. He looked at the jury and let them see the 39 birthdays Adrian never had. Richard tried one last performance. From the defense table he wore contrition like a cufflink, gazing at Camille when he sensed the cameras, writing neat notes to his lawyers as if neatness could domesticate horror. But the recordings cut through polish. On one, a whisper you could hold to the light. "Eleanor. She's pregnant." Richard. "You push, I'll cry." Eleanor. "Like the others." Richard. "The stairs." When the judge granted Park's motion to join the cases, the hall outside the courtroom went carnival. Cameras, murmurs. A man with a homemade sign that read "Remember Gabrielle" in purple crayon. Whitaker hated the circus. She loved the attention span it bought. 1 week before trial, maintenance crews ringed the Mercer house with chain link. City Council passed a resolution by unanimous voice. The property would come down after the verdict, the ground consecrated as a memorial garden to the dead. Eleanor's lawyers filed an emergency injunction, tradition, heritage, architecture, but the judge glanced at the photographs of flagged graves and said, "This street has enough ghosts without a monument to their maker." That night, under a sky heavy with heat lightning, Camille stood on the sidewalk across from the mansion that had broken her life open. Police lights washed the facade blue. Evidence triangles still dotted the steps like pale petals. Rosa hooked an arm through hers and passed her a paper cup of diner coffee. "You're shaking," Rosa said. "I'm angry," Camille answered. "Good," Rosa said. "Keep some of it. You'll need it for the stand." The trial opened in early spring, live oaks jeweled with new leaves and the courthouse steps crowded with cameras. Inside Division 3, Judge Celeste Barnett warned the gallery twice about outbursts, and then let the record begin. Special Prosecutor Cynthia Park stood with a binder the size of a hymnal. Detective Naomi Whitaker took the first seat at the witness stand and started laying brick. She walked the jury through the house like a tour guide who knew where the bodies were, the Carrara marble treads, the height differential from the top landing to the mid-rail, laser map vectors, the distance between the accident and the places Eleanor said she'd been. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Dr. Fernando Salinas followed, speaking in measured syllables the jurors scribbled down like scripture. Posterior cranial fractures. Perimortem torsion in a small ulna. Strychnine and cyanide in hair shafts and cortical bone. "Falls don't leave hands on ribs," he said, tapping an exhibit photo. "People do." Then Rosa Alvarez, in her best church dress, fingers wrapped around a damp tissue. She told them about the pantry whispers, the ribbon snagged on the banister, the way Eleanor softened right before she struck. She told them, voice shaking and then steadying, why she'd hidden mini-cassettes and a thumb drive for years. Park fed in the recordings one by one. The room froze when the jury heard it. Eleanor whisper. She's pregnant. The secretary. Richard flat. You push, I'll cry. Eleanor. We'll do this like the others. Richard. The stairs. Nurse Patricia Sandoval testified next, eyes rimmed red, scrubs traded for a dark suit. She'd been there the day Camille's ambulance screamed in. She'd been there 3 hours earlier when a woman in a silk scarf and sunglasses asked too many questions at the nurse's desk. Security pulled footage. There Eleanor was, reflected in chrome elevator doors, checking the clock. Paloma Vega approached the stand like a storm that had learned its own path. She authenticated the President Hotel bar recording, the metadata, the selfie with Richard's lazy V sign. Park pressed play. The jury listened to a younger Richard talk about chamomile tea, hiding anything, and Kinder Truths. ADA Raul Mendizabal took the oath with hands that didn't shake and said into the microphone that his father had falsified death records for the powerful, and that one of those records belonged to Caroline Mercer. He had recused to testify against his own blood. You could feel the room recalibrating its idea of courage. The defense tried to sweat at everything. Deepfake, they said of the tapes. Contamination, they said of the graves. Grief hallucinations, they said of Camille. They floated an expert who opined, politely, that stairs are unforgiving, that Savannah is humid, that marble is slick, and watched Park dismantle him with timelines and physics he couldn't bend. On the morning Camille testified, the courtroom was so still the HVAC hum sounded like an organ note. She told them about the shove. About the dry stone. About waking up without a heartbeat inside her. She told them about the box, the letters, the names, the diary whose ink had outlived the woman who wrote it. When Park asked what she wanted from the court, Camille looked at the jury and said, "Not vengeance. Accuracy." The word hung in the air like a level. Richard took the stand against advice, the old Mercer hauteur cinched tight. On direct he was a softened man with a cracked voice. On cross, Park turned the room into mirrors he couldn't avoid. When Ms. Vega asked what happened to Caroline, you said chamomile tea hides anything, correct? I don't recall. Let me help your memory, Park said, and pressed play. When your mother said, we'll do this like the others, you responded, the stairs, correct? Out of context. The context is a dead wife, a dead child, and 15 graves behind a rose garden. Eleanor refused to testify. When the judge asked if she understood her right to do so, she smiled, then spoke 7 words that slid an ice finger along every spine in the room. I would do it all again. Park didn't object. She didn't need to. Closings took half a day. Park stood in front of 12 ordinary people and, without raising her voice, stacked evidence into a shape they could not look away from. Physics, money, bones, voices, ribbons, tea. This house built a myth, she said, gesturing toward an exhibit photo of the staircase webbed in red laser. You are the ones who decide whether myth outranks math. The jury was out for 2 hours and 16 minutes. They filed back in with faces like granite. Guilty, on every count that mattered. Murder. Felony murder. Conspiracy. Fraud. Forgery. Obstruction. Judge Barnett, who had planted a sapling outside this courthouse when she was 8 and watched it grow taller than the portico, sentenced Eleanor Whitlow Mercer to life without the possibility of parole and Richard Whitlow Mercer Jr. to life without the possibility of parole plus additional consecutive terms for fraud and conspiracy. You turned a home into a killing mechanism, she said. The law will be what stops it. City Council moved fast. Fencing rose around the Mercer house. Preservationists argued in soft voices about facades and history. Families of the dead spoke in harder voices about gardens and names. A month later, the excavators bit into plaster and lath. Neighbors stood with coffee cups at dawn, watching a legend come apart into dust. When the last wall fell, someone clapped once, and no one shushed them. By autumn, a path wound where the staircase had been. A bronze plaque read the Garden of Names. Along the walk, 16 low posts bore ribbons behind shatterproof glass. 15 carried a name: Adrian Morales, 1985, Caroline Mercer, 1988, Isabel Ramirez, 1998, Gabriel Mercer, 2001, Socorro Ramirez, Rosa Maria Gonzalez, Patricia Villalobos, Ana Lucia Herrera, Esperanza Torres, and 6 others Park's team had identified from records and bone markers. The 16th ribbon was plain white, the letters simple, Baby Foster. On a cool Sunday, Camille came with Rosa and Joaquin. Spanish moss swayed in slow sentences above them. Bees worried the mully grass. Camille carried a wreath of white flowers threaded with slim gold bands. She laid it where the first riser once creaked, where a lemonade ribbon had torn. Joaquin set Adrienne's letters beneath a clear stone and said, Mi hermana, into the wind. Rosa pressed her palm to the plaque and whispered all the names twice, as if making sure they heard. Detective Whitaker arrived in her running shoes, hair damp from the river path, and hung back until Camille straightened. I brought the final filings, Whitaker said, lifting a manila envelope. For your records. Camille slid it into her tote without looking. I trust you, she said. They walked the path together. You know what I keep thinking? Camille asked at last. What's that? That houses remember, Camille said. Even if people pretend not to. Whitaker nodded toward the bronze. They will now. They sat on a bench under a live oak and watched a little girl tug her father toward the purple crayon on Gabriel's post. The father read the plaque softly. The child traced the stick figures with a reverent finger. Somewhere, a church bell counted noon. What will you do next? Whitaker asked. Tell the truth for a living, Camille said. Start a fund in their names. Pay for headstones no one paid for. Maybe write the math down so no one can make a myth out of it again. Whitaker smiled, small and real. Accuracy, she said. Accuracy, Camille echoed. They stood. The wind lifted, the ribbons stirred. Behind the fence line, the last of the Mercer rubble was being loaded into a truck, crushed tile and old nails rattling like rain. Camille touched the white ribbon one more time. The one that held a name that never got to grow into a voice, and the garden felt, for the first time, like ground that could bear something good. As they walked away, Rosa tucked her hand into Camille's elbow. Mija, she said, voice warm with something that had survived them all. Let's get lunch. We have a whole afternoon to spend doing ordinary things. They turned down the sidewalk under the shade of the oaks. The house that had been a machine for killing was gone. In its place, a place for names, for remembering, for breath. And in the hush that followed the end of a long noise, the city exhaled and went on.